It's a lecture video for pages 567 through 581, chapter 20 in it, which is the politics of the late 1800s and government moving into the turn of the century. Public enthusiasm and participation is at an all-time high. People love to be a part of politics at this point in time. They love to be a part of a party. Campaigns had pageantry. They're enthralled in large and small communities in almost every man, virtually all men. Again, men, because men are the only ones that can vote, and participated in politics, including immigrants and African Americans. Give them a voice, and they feel like they can use that voice. Political parties mobilize huge electorates through detailed records, ensuring registration, transporting voters to the polls. They know who you are. They're going to make sure that you're registered, and they're getting more people registered, literally taking people to the polls and helping them vote. The process was open and partisan, but not necessarily corrupt. It's one side or the other, of course. Democrats and Republicans enjoy an almost even balance of support, which makes them work even harder to get out the vote. Party affiliation is determined by a bunch of different things, but of course it's by where you live, what you believe, who you are, and what's going on around you. Republicans are strongest in the North and the Midwest, whereas Democrats are the strongest in the South and the urban Northeast. Republicans identify with nationalism, America, and national unity, while Democrats favored limited government and personal liberties. So stronger government for the Republicans, and a more limited government by the Democrats. There's little room for a third party. These third parties that do pop up are typically focused on a specific issue. For a long time, we're going to talk a lot about the different third parties, but for a long time in America, there was what was called the Green Party, which was the group that wanted to legalize marijuana. They never really had a serious candidate, but they always put one out there. And their sole thing was to legalize marijuana. Okay. But we do have these other political parties. The Prohibition Party, who wants to stop the sale of alcohol, the abolition of alcohol. The Greenback Party, which advocated currency inflation to expand the economy. And then the big one, the biggest third party, the major third party of the 1890s to the turn of the century was the Populist Party, and mostly dealing with farmers, and they have some advances or successes in the West and locally, but when it becomes nationally, they don't really have a whole lot of success. You can see here how things worked from 1876 to 1892, how most states voted one way. So you have certain states voting Republican 4 to 5 times or Democrat 4 to 5 times, and then a few that voted regularly, like for this example of New York, Illinois, Nevada, and California. Associations of people with similar opinions operated outside the electoral arena, but played a significant role on politics. All that is saying is these are the lobbyists before they were lobbyists. These are the guys who are out there working for one group of people. The Grange, for example, campaigned for Granger laws to help farmers, but they remain nonpartisan. They're not going to get involved in any party. The Mugwumps lobbied for civil service reform. So they wanted to reform all the government positions and how you got those jobs. And again, these are just like today, oil and gas and the different environmentalists and things like that. They have lobbyists who want to get money in the pocket of politicians in their campaign so that they will theoretically vote that individual association's way. Women are active in politics, especially through the National American Women's Suffrage Association, known as NAWSA. It's founded in 1890, and it's a social service organization. This all comes out. Remember, 1844 was the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments of Women in Seneca Falls, New York. And then now to the 1890s, we have this new organization that are starting to gain traction. It's going to take some time, but they gain traction with NAWSA, and then also with the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which had a massive following because women are the number one group that wants to stop alcohol and things of that nature. Congress and the presidency were divided between the two parties, so there's a small and inefficient bureaucracy. Judicial restraints and resurgent belief in localism and laissez-faire policy, laissez-faire, stay out of the government, or stay out of the government, stay out of the economy, the size and the objective of the federal government are limited. It's not like it is today. The federal government's much smaller. It doesn't have their hands in a lot of different things, and they are limited to what they do. But Johnson gets impeached. Okay, so let's go through this really quick. Johnson is told, he tries to fire Secretary of, oh my gosh, I'm having a brain cramp. Stanton. Okay, who happens to be the Secretary of War, and he fires him. Well, Congress says you can't do that. So he basically forces him to resign. So Congress calls up charges on the president, and those are brought up by the House of Representatives. So he's officially impeached, drawn up charges. Then it goes to the Senate, and they vote, and majority rules. Now, the craziest thing is here, which with impeachment, which not a lot of people understand, and I think it's one flaw of our government, is the fact that if they tie in the Senate, the head of the Senate breaks the tie, and the head of the Senate happens to be the vice president. We almost had history made there and had a vice president have to decide whether that president was going to leave or not. But Johnson survives by one vote. And so it weakens the power of the presidency, and the presidents are viewed their duties as administrative. And that's why there's a whole bunch of presidents that we don't really get into. We may talk about them on one slide and we move on to the next one. It's really not until we get to, we talk about Cleveland just a little bit. We obviously talk about Roosevelt a great deal, but it's really not until McKinley that we start talking about the president and what they do. Congress was the most powerful branch of the national government. Early in the period, Congress was inefficient, but as more legislation was required, it formed its procedures and structures and gained traction. Federal bureaucracy remained small, was criticized as being corrupt and inefficient, with the spoils system coming into play here. And the spoils system had to do with, giving jobs away because you were a party member to whoever was in charge. So that's where the corruption comes in. State governments are more active than federal governments. The federal government kind of just lays low. Now, federal government is still active, but the states are a lot more active even today still. A lot of the laws that become national laws start out as state laws, seatbelt law, things like that. And so we see that coming through in our government today. Reform of the spoils system gained momentum during the Hayes administration. Again, here we talk about Hayes for like 3 seconds. And so they want to change how you get a job. It needs to be on your credentials. It needs to be on merit, not based on party affiliation. It needs to be, as the second bullet point says, divorced from politics. Garfield gets assassinated by a person who wanted to be appointed to office. And quickly following this, Congress passes the Pendleton Civil Service Act that emphasized merit and skill in government appointments. It also created the Civil Service Commission to make sure that these rules were being followed. Now, the tariff issue is a hotly debated topic in the 1800s. It's linked to Republicans and Democrats and ideology and regional concerns, whether you're in the North or the South, or technically the East and the West. The Republican Party is committed to industry, and they want protective tariffs. The Democrats espouse laissez-faire, and they favor tariff reduction. Leave the economy alone. Let it go as it goes. Political disagreements, however, it was how much the tariff should be and whom should be protected. That's the big deal. Farmers, is it industry? Who is it that should be protected in this? Okay, and this chart right here does a really good job. We talked about it in class on high tariff advocates, low tariff advocates for industry, employment, things of that nature. Popular pressure began to propel Congress to take their first steps towards regulating businesses, and they're going to start with the railroads and proceed to interstate commerce and corporate monopolies, and we're going to eventually get to those, but it's starting federal regulation of this needs to be a federal law, this needs to be a federal law, this needs to be a federal law, because it comes down to things that aren't the states can't rule on, because it has to do with things that happen in more than one state. The Interstate Commerce Act is passed in 1887, which is a regulatory agency which establishes the Interstate Commerce Commission, which regulates in 1887, which was created basically to regulate and oversee railroad practices because of what they're doing to the farmers. And then the big one, the Sherman Antitrust Act, which breaks up monopolies, which is passed in 1890 and will be used by all the trust-busting presidents and to break up those trusts, aka monopolies. And that was the lecture for reading 567 through 581.